I finally completed my 5 Things series on every Star Trek movie, which you can watch right here. So I asked you, my loyal viewers, what video do you want me to do next? And the resounding call was for my Star Trek movie rankings. So that's what I'm going to be doing in this video, going from worst to best. And yes, we are doing all 14 movies, including that one. And remember, these are my rankings. However, I'm looking forward to being told in the comments how my subjective opinion is wrong. So, to get you ready, I've put one film most fans dislike in my top 5, and another beloved classic doesn't even make my top 2. And I suspect at least one of these picks is going to make you question my judgment. For each movie, I'm going to pick something that I liked and something that I didn't, which is going to be interesting when you look at both extremes. So let's get into it. Of course this was going to be here. This is the worst Star Trek film. When Section 31 came out, I did do a review and I said this. Because if Section 31 was released as an action sci-fi completely unattached to the Star Trek universe, then do you know what? It's a pretty fun, if forgettable movie, you know? And I stick to what I said in my original review, that it's not a bad sci-fi action film, but it is a bad Star Trek film. The acting is, bad Irish accent aside, mostly good, and it looks wonderful, but the writing feels like 3 pilot episodes in a trench coat wearing a badge that says, "Hello, my name is Movie." However, the biggest issue with Section 31 is just the whole concept of it. This movie takes away all of the mystery of Section 31, and rather than them being an organization that is willing to do the unpleasant things that need to be done to keep the Federation safe, we get the Suicide Squad in space, and not the James Gunn one. And this is not the only pilot retooled into a movie on this list, however, it's the one that doesn't do it well. But before we get to that one, the next movie on my list is a failed retread of a good Star Trek movie. What happens when someone who isn't a Star Trek fan decides to try and turn the final third of a passable sci-fi film into an homage to one of the best Star Trek movies of all time? Into Darkness. This movie was such a disappointment when following on from Star Trek 2009. J.J. Abrams spent months insisting that Benedict Cumberbatch wasn't Khan. No one believed it, and when the reveal finally came, it just landed with a thud. However, if there is something that I do like, then it's that it does have some great set pieces. Khan attacking the meeting of the Starfleet heads, logic aside, is great. The battle on Kronos is fantastic, and Kirk and Khan's spaceflight between the Enterprise and the Vengeance is pretty thrilling. However, a couple of good set pieces just can't save this movie from being the disappointment that it is. And it's crazy that this was the 3rd time they reused the Khan story trope. The 2nd time was, of course, this movie, combined with the underwhelming series Enterprise, was the death knell for the 90s golden age of Star Trek, and for good reason. There was so much that went wrong with this film, but it can all be boiled down to the director, Stuart Baird. He never engaged with the material in the same way that other directors unfamiliar with Star Trek did, and didn't even consult with the cast about their characters. Characters they had been playing for over 25 years at this point. The result is a film that never really understands the next generation cast. Most of them barely have anything to do, and what should have been Picard's most personal story somehow feels emotionally disconnected. if there's something that I can say that I like about this, it's Tom Hardy. I think he does a good job as a young, more angry Picard, and he works well against Patrick Stewart. But those are the movies that I truly considered bad. The next ones, I feel, are bad, but have something defensible about them. I actually think that The Final Frontier has some very redeemable moments. DeForest Kelley's performance during the confront your pain scenes, the bookended camping scenes at the beginning and the end of the film, and, of course,
what does God need with a starship?
All of these are memorable, and especially the camping scenes are some fantastic character moments. However, this movie is let down by looking cheap in comparison to the other movies around it, by some strange choices like Uhura's fan dance and a story that feels a little stunted. It constantly feels like you're watching a compromise rather than the film that Shatner actually wanted to make. I mean, at least we got introduced to marshmallows. Insurrection is the fantastic two-part episode that somehow got stretched out into a movie. And this is Insurrection's worst sin. Well, that and none of the crew giving their condolences to Worf for having just lost his wife, Jadzia. Insurrection is pretty inoffensive as a film, to be honest. And in comparison to some of the other TNG films, actually feels like a very Star Trek story with just some extended action sequences, which is why it feels like a two-parter. Also, I just really like the HMS Pinafore scene.
And his fist be ever ready for a knockdown blow.
Yes, it's a bit dumb, but it's fun, and Star Trek has always had fun but dumb bits in it. But next up is one that I've changed my mind on a lot. The motion picture is the other film that started life as a TV pilot. Now, I talk about this on my 5 Things video here, but the TLDR is that they were going to bring back Star Trek as a TV show called Star Trek Phase 2. Star Wars was made and highly successful, and Paramount wanted that success, so the pilot of Phase 2 was made into a movie. The thing is, though, Star Trek and Star Wars are two very different franchises. And whilst I love both, Star Wars is a classic good versus evil hero's journey based in a fantasy space setting. It's space D&D. Star Trek has always been more cerebral, exploring where humanity could be if we set aside racism, sexism, homophobia, and explore the stars. Star Trek explores what it means to be human and how we can make a better future for ourselves. And the motion picture is a big idea, more on a par with a 2001 Space Odyssey rather than the more action-focused Star Wars, which, when it was released, it was compared to and naturally came up short because they're very different movies. And I used to think that the motion picture was a bad film, but as time has gone on, I actually think its worst crime is that it's maybe about 20 minutes too long and moves a little bit too slow at times. However, the reveal of the refit Enterprise is iconic, and the music, now that we've seen the new Enterprise, it's only right that the next one is on my list. Search for Spock suffers from being the awkward middle child between two iconic siblings. That being said, I think this movie is a lot of fun. In his directorial debut, Leonard Nimoy puts together a fun movie that gives us a Mission Impossible vibe when they try to break out McCoy out of jail and steal the Enterprise. Gives us one of my favorite lines from Sulu when I was a kid.
Don't call me Tiny.
Christopher Lloyd lets rip as a Klingon, and of course, we have the destruction of the Enterprise. Where it really struggles, like many sequels, is that it is wholly reliant on the movies around it to make sense. So while fans of the series feel the emotional stakes, they mean nothing if you haven't seen The Wrath of Khan. Now, the next 3, I moved around multiple times while writing this script, but You know what? I'm going to stick to my guns on this one. I've said this in previous videos, but my journey with my Star Trek fandom involved a good period of time where I hid how much I loved Star Trek. When J.J. Abrams' Star Trek was released in 2009, it reminded me why I fell in love with the franchise in the first place and made me re-engage with my fandom. So yeah, I had a lot of love for this movie when it was released, and I still do. It's a lot of fun, and the casting is really good, especially Carl Urban. However, there are issues with the script as a result of the cuts that were made, and when you look at what Star Trek is, this is the opposite problem of the motion picture. This is an action sci-fi closer to Star Wars than Star Trek. However, it is the development of the relationship between the characters throughout the film that puts it as high as it is on my list. But Rik, I hear you ask, where is Beyond? I truly believe that Beyond is the best of the three Kelvin movies, as it's the one that feels closest to original Star Trek. And this is probably due to the writing team that included Simon Pegg and a director, Justin Lin, who grew up as a fan of Star Trek. I mean, yes, Krall's motivation is pretty weak and the movie performed badly at the box office, but that was mainly due to a terrible marketing campaign. However, this movie does work. Splitting up the crew leads to fun moments between McCoy and Spock, Scotty and Jayla, Kirk and Chekhov. And the alien design in this film is fantastic. Okay, people, get ready to get into the comments because this one, I know, this next one is controversial. Look, I like Generations. This was the first Star Trek movie I saw in the cinema, which is why it's so high on this list for me. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. The logic of the Nexus makes zero sense. Why does Picard go back to Viridian 3 and not back to 10 Forward to just arrest Sauron there and then? Kirk's death was underwhelming, though, in fairness, it was a lot better than what was originally shot.
24th century isn't so tough.
Using the DS9 uniforms looks pretty bad, especially on Riker and Geordi, but there's a lot to like. Data getting his emotion chip is well done, and I love Mr. Tricorder. The interaction between Sauron and Picard in 10 Forward is chilling. And look, whilst the Enterprise D was destroyed in an annoying way, the saucer section landing was a very cool, well put together sequence. I will always defend Generations, even if I am wrong. However, as much as I like Generations, the next four are the best of the best. Yes, the one with the whales. I've said this before, but The Voyage Home feels like Star Trek's Christmas movie. It's a lot of fun, doesn't take itself too seriously, and it's a commentary on environmentalism. In fact, you could argue that of all the movies, this is the one that is truest to the spirit of the TV series. Seeing the Enterprise crew interact with 1980s San Francisco leads to some genuinely hilarious moments. It's genuinely hard to come up with a criticism for this film. The score isn't the best. That's it. That's all I got. Okay, we're into the top three. And look, before we get into it, I just want to preface this with saying that there is literally nothing separating these films. However, I can't have a joint first place, so I'm going to have to put one of them into third, and it is time for my truly controversial opinion. Look, I know, the general consensus is that Wrath of Khan is the greatest Star Trek film of all time, and usually I'm inclined to agree, but I had to put one into third place, and these rankings are based on my personal opinion and preference, so here we are. Wrath of Khan is a fantastic thriller, and Ricardo Montalban just chews the scenery every time he's on the screen. The battle in the Mutara Nebula is genuinely one of the best space battles committed to screen. And of course, Spock's sacrifice is genuinely one of the most moving pieces of cinematic history. If I have a criticism of the film, is that Khan himself dominates the film so completely that some of the supporting cast really don't have a huge amount to do. And another problem with Wrath of Khan is its legacy. First, the follow-up movie Search for Spock kind of negates the heroic sacrifice made by Spock. However, the main problem with the Wrath of Khan's legacy is that it was so good that Star Trek tried the same exact formula 2 more times in Nemesis and Into Darkness. And it just feels like the laziest thing to do now. Hey, we need a new Star Trek film. Shall we do Wrath of Khan again? Khan? Wrath of Khan? Right, we're almost there. Before I go into 2, if you've enjoyed this video so far, why not give it a like? Even if you've totally disagreed with me. Yes, I have put The Undiscovered Country above Wrath of Khan. I just feel that The Undiscovered Country edges Khan by how well it handles the scope of the story. Like, Wrath of Khan is a very focused story of revenge. The Undiscovered Country is a political thriller that is an allegory for the Cold War, takes on the concept of aging and usefulness and confronting your own bigotry. And as a final swan song for the original series crew, it's fantastic. All the crew get their own moments to shine, and we get to see Captain Sulu. Undiscovered Country works so well because ultimately it knows what has always made Star Trek work: the relationships between the characters. Like all Star Trek films, it does have its issues though. The 2 main ones being the overuse of Regis sets make it feel like a little cheap, and Uhura's scene trying to speak Klingon feels oddly out of character. It was clearly included to try and inject some humor into the film. But aside from that, this movie gets me every time with its final line.
Second star to the right. And straight on till morning.
And the signatures appearing ahead of the end credits. This means that my number 1 can only be Star Trek The Next Generation was my Star Trek growing up, so I may be a little biased. However, I feel this movie gets so much right. The main plot on the Enterprise E with the Borg slowly taking over the ship is thrilling and puts the crew into a no-win scenario. The Borg Queen makes for an intriguing addition to the Borg, and of course, the seduction of Data only for him to remain loyal to his captain and crew is really well done. And while all of this is happening, there is another, more light-hearted movie happening with the crew on Earth trying to help Zefram Cochrane build the first warp-capable ship. And there are some very fun moments, including Deanna getting drunk with Zefram Cochrane, Barclay geeking out about meeting him, and this line from Cochrane himself.
And you people, you're all astronauts on some kind of Star Trek.
Ultimately, what makes First Contact work is that it somehow balances horror, action, comedy, and genuine optimism without any of those elements undermining the others. If I have any criticism of this film, it would probably be the same as I have for the other TNG movies, that Picard has gone from being this fantastic diplomat and orator to being action Picard. However, despite that, this movie is my favorite crew at their very best, which is why this is my number 1 film. So there you go, that's my ranking. And if you've made it this far without opening the comments to tell me Generations should definitely not be as high as number 5, well done you, I'm proud of you. But now, go on, tell me how wrong I am in those comments. But if you do so, you have to tell me your rankings as well. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to support this channel, please like and subscribe. You can also check out the 5 Things series on all of the movies right here. Thanks for watching.